Again, my name is Leonardo Clarke. I am from the wonderful snowy state of Minnesota. We got 6 inches of snow this past week, so we're getting a head start on the winter festivities. I'm in my final year at the University of Minnesota, and today I'll be presenting on the work that I've done with Dr. Bob Benjamin and Dr. DK involving the structure of the stellar disk in the outer Milky Way galaxy. In this presentation, I'll be talking about our goals with this project, our analysis process, the data set that we started off with, how we modeled the data, and our future work on the project. So as we all know, we live in the Milky Way galaxy, which is a spiral galaxy that has a flat disk. And the disk is where the majority of the stars in our galaxy live. Which is something you can observe for yourself if you ever see the Milky Way out on a dark night in the country. A notable feature in the disk of our galaxy is that the concentration of stars is highest in the center, and then it gradually decreases as you move toward the outskirts. You can see this directly when you look at a face-on spiral galaxy like M101, which I show in the background. And if we were to plot the surface density of the Milky Way with respect to galactocentric radius on a log scale, we might get a graph that looks something like an exponentially decreasing disk of stars. We also believe that there is a break in the density at a certain radius. And by break, we mean that there's a distance from the center of the galaxy where we see a significant turnoff in the number density of stars. So what evidence points us to believe that we see this break in the galaxy? There's a number of studies that point to this, but I'll be talking about findings from a 2010 study by Miniti et al., as well as from my mentor, Dr. Bob Benjamin. In the figure on the left, we see an artist's impression of the Milky Way galaxy, and superimposed on that artist's impression is a number of line segments, all centered at the location of the sun. Each line segment represents a line of sight that was used in that study in order to observe the number density of stars with distance. And as you can see, they all seem to terminate at relatively the same galactocentric radius of about 14 kiloparsecs. This is where we believe we see a break in the outer Milky Way. The type of star that was used to obtain the data in this figure is called a red clump giant, which we'll talk about more when we're discussing the work from this project. On the right-hand side, we have work carried out by my mentor, Dr. Bob Benjamin, that uses 3.6 micron infrared data from glimpse to probe star counts in the Milky Way. On the x-axis, we have galactic longitude, which tells us about our viewing angle in the plane of the galaxy from the point of view of the sun. And on the y-axis, we have magnitude as seen in 3.6 micron observations. The figure itself has a lot going on, but it contains valuable information about the galaxy. So let's take a single slice in longitude from this figure and observe what exactly is going on. You can see here that each slice corresponds to a histogram of the number of sources displayed on a logarithmic scale. The vertical axis, again, shows magnitude, and we see on the right-hand side that this translates to distance from the sun. You can see that in some spots on the histogram, they seem to have a steadily decreasing slope, and in other spots, the histogram looks a bit flatter. And this is where the color coding comes in. The color coding shows how the number of observed stars changes as a function of magnitude, or in other words, the slope of the histogram. The way that it's obtained is by first smoothing over the data, finding the derivative along the histogram, and color coding it accordingly. The parts where the histogram flattens are where you see the purple and the black, and the steeper parts are where you get the warmer red and orange colors. So you can see that around 12th to 14th magnitude, there's a flattening of the histogram of the number of stars, and this corresponds to a galactocentric distance of about 13 to 15 kiloparsecs. Now we can see this flattening in the histogram itself when we extract individual longitudinal slices. The dimmer side of the histogram is mostly dominated by red dwarf stars, whereas the brighter side of the histogram is dominated by a type of red giant known as a red clump giant. A red clump giant is a type of red giant that's core helium burning. And we can see what makes them so special by looking at a color magnitude diagram. The diagonal band that you see is the familiar main sequence, and that sort of bridge of stars near the top is called the main sequence turnoff. The region of the diagram, or that region of the diagram, will be significant later in this talk. Finally, the clump of stars above the turnoff point is referred to as the red clump. And due to the fact that the red clump lies in a small range of absolute magnitudes, it serves as a good standard candle out to large distances, even beyond Gaia parallax measurements, which are reliable only up to about 3 kiloparsecs from the sun. It's a relatively straightforward conversion from here using distance modulus to physical distance, since we know the absolute magnitudes of red clump giants. So going back to this histogram, we know now that all the red clump giants are at the same absolute magnitude, and their apparent magnitude will indicate their distance from us. We also notice that the histogram flattens at about 12th magnitude, and this corresponds to a cutoff in the number of red clump giants at this magnitude. If we isolated the red clump giants from this sample, it might look something like this. And for this reason, we believe there to be a break in the volume density of stars in the Milky Way. Now, what we'd like to know is, can we reproduce this break by analyzing the projected surface density of stars in the Milky Way as opposed to the volume density? We begin answering this question by taking a look at the data set from a 2020 study that compiles data from 4 different surveys, 2MASS and AllWISE, which are infrared, and then Gaia and Pan-STARRS. Within these surveys, they identify a sample of red clump giants. With this in mind, we analyzed that data set containing 2.6 million photometrically selected red clump giants, and they had distances derived with those 2.6 million giants. And here is what the spatial distribution of that data set overlaid onto an artist's impression of the Milky Way looks like. I also show an edge-on view of the same data set off to the right. Here I show another way that we visualize the data via an animation where the top left panel is a bird's eye view, the right panel is a meridional slice of the data, and the bottom left panel is a surface density profile at a given meridional slice. One noteworthy feature is that around 8 kiloparsecs, or at the location of the sun, there's a significant gap in the data. And the second noteworthy feature is that we're missing much of the data in the midplane due to optical dust extinction. With this in mind, we wanted to get an idea of the completeness of this data with respect to azimuth. When we talk about azimuth, we're referring to the galactocentric polar angle, which when we take the data and plot the projected surface density as a function of galactocentric radius and azimuth, we get the following plot. Here we plot between an azimuth of 100 and 200 degrees, and from 10 to 20 kiloparsecs in radius, which lies in a region just beyond the sun. For this data to be reliable, we'd expect that the projected surface density should be relatively constant with azimuth and line up with these vertical lines. However, what we're seeing is that the projected surface density more closely follows the lines of constant distance from the sun. And because of this incompleteness, we decide to work only on the data between 170 and 190 degrees in azimuth. Our next step was to model the disk of the galaxy in the 170 to 190 degree range of this sample of red clump giants and see what we could find. The equation for this model is shown here from a 2018 study by Lopez Corredora, where the disk is broken up into a thin and a thick disk component. The model assumes that the galaxy is axisymmetric, meaning it doesn't vary with azimuth, and that the volume density of stars depends on galactocentric radius and height above or below the midplane. The Lopez Corredora study uses data obtained from the Sloan Digital Sky Survey in order to generate a model of the galaxy. And the population of stars that they study is the main sequence turnoff stars that we saw in the color magnitude plot earlier in the presentation. Using the parameters from the study as initial guesses, we used Markov chain Monte Carlo methods to construct an 11-parameter model of the disk from our data. And the interesting piece of this analysis, it happens in the modeling of the thick disk, specifically at the scale height of the thick disk, which is a measure of how slowly the number of stars decays as you move away from the disk. In calculating the scale height of the thick disk, we include a parameter RFT, which is included in the 2018 paper. And it describes the radius at which we see a flare in the disk. The model's scale height of the disk is constant inside of this flaring radius, and outside the flaring radius, the scale height varies as you move further and further out. For both our model and the Lopez Corredora model, we see that the flare happens at around 6 kiloparsecs with a high upper limit on the uncertainty. One interesting thing to note is that our data only span 10 to 20 kiloparsecs, and yet our model still reproduces this flaring radius that agrees with the 2018 model. Beyond this, our model parameters do differ in other respects. The polynomials that describe the shape of the flare, for example, are relatively different, especially for the thick disk. The scale lengths that describe the thin disk are in relative agreement, and the scale lengths that describe the thick disk don't really seem to agree quite as well. Although the break in the outer galaxy wasn't evident in our data sets, it was still interesting to compare the parameters we were able to find here with this data set from the study of main sequence turnoff stars from 2018. And moving on to the previous data set that we were looking at, we are now beginning to bring our attention to more exclusively infrared data surveys. The two that are currently of interest to us are the 2-micron all-sky survey and the UKIDDS Galactic plane survey. And we plan to use 2MASS for more nearby infrared sources, while UKIDDS-GPS may prove more useful for deeper infrared observations. For future work on the project, again, it might be interesting to see how the flaring of the disk affects the structure of the outer Milky Way. And in addition, we're moving away from the previous sample of 2.6 million red clumps from the 2020 study and transitioning to look at an infrared-only data set, expanding on what's been done already by my mentor, Dr. Benjamin. And as well as seeing the break in the stellar density with these data, we also plan to check the completeness of this data set. Here's the bibliography. And I'd like to go ahead and thank my mentor, Dr. Bob Benjamin, as well as UW-Madison and the NSF for making this all possible. I'd like to thank my RU program director for running an online program, and I especially like to thank the NAC program for helping me get an internship last year with the NAC-7 cohort. And thank you very much.
Hey, Leonardo, very nice talk. I had a question about a plot or a type of plot that I think I saw in a couple of places where you were showing the vertical distribution of the stars in the working sample, and it looked like it was actually avoiding z=0, and it seemed likely that was some sort of an observational selection effect, but I was just wondering if you could comment on that. Whatever is that kind of open-jawed shape off to the right is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's off towards the galactic center. So that's where you're getting a lot of dust extinction and just things in the way because it's denser over there. And a lot of this relies on optical data. So.
Gotcha. Okay.
Yep.
Thank you.
This is really awesome data, by the way. It's amazing. And where again are you getting most of your clump stars? I think I got myself a little confused multitasking here. I apologize, but because I saw Gaia HR diagrams and then other things, and you were talking about glimpse. So where are your sources from?
Yep. So this was a plot made by my mentor using glimpse data, and then that's where like this and this histogram comes from. This I just showed as an example. This is the Gaia color magnitude plot. I just showed it because it shows the red clump really well.
Yeah. And
then this is a sample from a 2020 study of 2.6 million photometrically selected red clump giant stars. These are the ones that lie over here.
Oh, they are Gaia stars.
They're not. I'll have to double check. I think they do use Gaia in order to. I know they use Gaia in some way in their sample, but the main survey that's used in this is Pan-STARRS.
Oh, okay.
Yep. So that's why you have this huge gap here that doesn't include stars that are in the southern hemisphere. So.
Okay, so maybe they have Gaia distances, but they're Pan-STARRS stars. Okay, very great. Okay, thanks.
Thank you so much, Leonardo, for your talk.